Component of the Statstrack system is the iPad-based Statstrack app. And this is what we use to capture key events and enter information throughout the course of a game, as well as provide coaches with various information by way of various summaries, visual reports for team and player, as well as progression and trend analysis over time at various courses throughout the season. We won't get into the details of how to track. Typically, that's something that we tend to do on behalf of our teams. About 98% of the teams that we work with utilize a full service method, whereby we do the tracking of information, whether it's live in-game or via archive, and provide the various reports that coaches receive. So we'll just get into the details of how information is broken down within the system. So any information we want to get out of the app, we get through the drop-down menu here in the corner. The app, as we mentioned earlier, is broken into 4 components from an administrative standpoint, a tracking standpoint, reporting, and coach's insight. So team management and game schedules is typically where the administrative functions live, and it's very straightforward. Team management is just your team and full roster, all of your opponents and their rosters. So we're accurately capturing information on everybody throughout the season. Game schedules is very straightforward. Any games that haven't been played would be an upcoming game. And then obviously past games or completed games are going to fall into your past games section. And this is where you can get into some depth from an individual game perspective. So as an example, let's say I wanted to get into this last game and get a deeper insight into how we performed. This will show you a layout, and you'll also see this page on your video dashboard. So this will become very familiar to you. But this is a layout of everything that occurred in the period at the moment in time in the period that it occurred. Gold boxes would be events performed by your team, and gray boxes would be events for the opponent team. The vertical colors are your sustained zone times. So any blocks of orange would be sustained offensive zone time. Blocks of blue is going to be time where you were hemmed in your own zone, and slivers of white are just your back and forth neutral zone time. If I want to get some deeper insight into the game itself, however, I can click on the notes section here in the corner. And this will give me a detailed summary of not just the team's overall performance, but also a running stat line for every individual player for that game. So all you would do in this case is scroll. I'm just using my finger here to scroll on the app. And this will show you what every player did within that game. And then very similarly on the bottom, this is your team's performance on a period-by-period basis, game total, and then how does your game total line up versus your season average. So in a quick view, you can get a sense of whether this was sort of a fairly average status quo in line with your typical performance, whether this was sort of an overachievement type of game, or whether you had a rough outing and you tended to underperform that game versus your average. Again, this section is scrolling as well, and gives you deeper insight into all of the metrics that we've captured, which also includes zone time for all 3 zones. From the reports perspective, again, going back into the drop-down menu here, you can look at information from a very broad top-line season-to-date perspective, or you can look at information combining a variety of metrics from specific players to specific games, specific opponents, and so on. And we'll get into that in a moment here. But the first thing is getting into the various report types. So if you just wanted to see performance on a report, your team total to date, you just pick the report type that you want. In this case, we'll pick a shots on goal heat map. And if you just want to see total to date for the entire team, you just hit run report, and your report comes up instantly. Reports can all be emailed out. Any report that comes up can be emailed directly from the app. And this is how we get information out to coaches in-game very quickly. We just click on this email icon, and my email would come up. I can type in who's receiving that info and send it out right away. But if we wanted to get into filtering information down to get very specific, we can do that. So the various filters that you have, first and foremost, relate to team and player. So I can look at my performance against all teams. And again, I can quickly do that by hitting run report. Or I can look at a very specific team. So let's say I'm about to play, in this case, let's say we're going to play Czech again. I can just pick Czech, and this is our performance just against the Czech Republic. If I wanted to look at the opponent team's performance against me, I can do that as well. I can also look at filter things down by player. So I could look at, again, total team, or I can section things off by groups of players. So if I wanted to see my shots on goal just for my forwards collectively, I can do that. Or I can get into specific player. And this is how we produce the player reports over the trend analysis time frame. So in this case, we'll just pick a random player here. So this individual had one shot to date against the Czech Republic. So it gives you an example as to how you can break information down from team, opponent team, sections of player, or specific players individually. The next filter that we could use, we can also look at information from a game or period perspective. So we could look at the whole game, or we can break things down by individual period. And this is how we end up sending information out live in-game. We can look at time within the game. So we could look at the first 5 minutes, first 10, last minute, last 5, last 10. So again, that gives you an example of how do you perform perhaps in the first 10 minutes of the game versus the last 5 or last minute. Do you tend to give up tying goals in a 1-goal game within the last minute? Things like that. We can also look at time periods. We can look at the last game, last 5, last 10, or we can break things down by a range of dates. Say I wanted to look at the last 2 weeks, or I wanted to look just at the month of December. I can do that using the range of dates. And lastly, we can look at things by situation. So we can look at all games, games that we've won, lost, ended in a tie, if that applies to your league, games that we've won in overtime, and games that we've lost in overtime. And by situation, even strength, power play, penalty kill, sections in the game while we're winning, while we're losing, or while we are tied. And any of these filters can be combined. We call them stackable. So if I wanted, for example, if I wanted to see how my first line right winger performs in the first 5 minutes on the power play against a specific team in the month of December, I can do that. I just select those various filters. I can hit run report, and it will show me that information. An example from the trend analysis perspective is we can get into events reports, and we can look and see how our team is performing on any metric over the parameters. So in this case, last 5 games, from game 1 to 2 to 3 to 4. Are we maintaining a high average of performance, a high performance level? Are we maintaining just sort of an average per game? If the last few games were maybe rough outings and you're on a bit of a losing streak, you can kind of see your ebbs and flows of performance on any metric over the time frame that you set. So essentially speaking, that's the reporting function of the app, and we can get into various report types, which we can send along in terms of samples from the single game coaches report to a trend analysis report and a full season report as well.